welcome to this session on how to use your cash flow forecast to make better business decisions. My name's Lynne Robertson. I'm the Enterprise Education and Insight Lead at Santander Business Banking, and I spend most of my time helping people like you with their business planning, either through startup or growth. So what we're going to talk about today is basically this. This might strike fear into your hearts when you see this blank template. I'm sure it's something that you're all familiar with, either because you've completed one yourself for a funding application or for your business plan, or someone has completed one for you, which isn't ideal, to be honest. And actually part of the message from this session today is to get you feeling comfortable about using this tool yourself. But hopefully you will have come across it at some point in time. Now, you might have completed this when you first wrote your business plan and you've put it on the shelf and you have never looked at it again. I did it when I had a business many, many years ago, and I would say that it's not a habit that you want to get into. We want you to get into the habit of looking at this template, which will have lots more figures in it by the time you finish with it, and use it as a tool to help you make decisions about your business. Don't see it as something that you only do when a funder asks you to complete one or when you're asked for one as part of your business plan. See your cash flow forecasting as an integral part of how you run and manage your business. Now, when we first see a template like this with no figures on it, it's really daunting because you look at it and think, where am I going to find the numbers to put into this forecast? And this isn't about crystal ball gazing. It's not about plucking figures from thin air. It's about using the knowledge you have about your business, the market research that you've done, the market validation that you've done, to actually start thinking smartly in terms of what your future forecast is going to look like. And we're going to break that down into a couple of key steps. But the first thing is really important, let me just move this out of the way slightly, is that the cash flow is there to help you see when dry spells are coming, to help you perhaps make decisions about delaying an order or buying equipment or negotiating with a supplier to increase your payment terms, or to get a line of credit to see you through potentially some difficult times. So the cash flow forecast is a really vital tool to help you make decisions, and yet around 45% of startup businesses never bother completing one. So for people who are maybe not looking for funding, you might be bootstrapping your venture, you might have your own capital to invest, you may decide that a cash flow forecast isn't something that you need to do in the first place. Well, actually, I'd really, really encourage you to not think like that. Think about it as it says here. It is a tool that's going to help you predict what might happen with your business in the future. And the second thing to remember is that when it comes to sales forecasts, you're never going to get them 100% right straight away. You're not expected to know to the final pence what your sales forecasts are going to be. But remember, this is about starting to get a sense of the trends that you will see from your customers, the trends that you will see in the market. And actually, if you never tried to predict any sales, you would never have any goals to try and achieve. You would never be able to set yourself any budget. You would never know whether your business was going well or going badly, because you would have nothing to compare anything with. So it's really important that we get our heads around how we can think about our sales forecast in a smart way. So with any forecasting, there's always going to be a series of assumptions that we need to think about. And I like to think of cash flow assumptions as the workings out that sit behind your cash flow. It's like in school, you used to get extra marks for doing the working out, even if you didn't get the right answer. And your assumptions are about bringing your cash flow to life and giving us that logic that sits behind your figures. And there's two reasons why we do this. One, you might put a cash flow together one day and then you go back to it a week later or 2 weeks later or 3 months later and not have a clue where you got your figures from. But secondly, someone like me comes along who might be looking to potentially fund your business, and I can't understand where your logic comes from. I can't understand how you've come up with your figures. I can't understand the research that's gone into behind them. I can't see where your thinking is. I can't see where there's strategy behind those figures. And your assumptions will massively bring your cash flow forecast to life. So when we think about a sales forecast, we think about how it's bringing your revenue model to life. You might have a diversity of revenue streams and different customer segments. So your sales forecast is all about reflecting your pricing strategy. So how do you structure this for different segments? It's about reflecting your route to market. Are you selling directly? Are you selling through third parties? It's talking about the frequency. So how often are you selling to customers? Do you have repeat purchases, or are you constantly looking for new customers? It will talk about seasonality. So are there peaks and troughs in the season that you're trading in? And it will reflect payment terms. I think sometimes there's a danger that when we do a sales forecast, we assume that when we make a sale, the money will directly come into the business immediately. And that isn't always the case. And your cash flow forecast will help you look at the impact of having different payment terms that you're offering your customers. Now, if you're B2C, so business to consumer, you would expect payment to come in immediately. Although we are seeing increasingly smaller companies being able to operate some payment terms through platforms like Klarna. You know, it's all about paying later because we think we're going to attract new customers. When we think business to business, so B2B, we might be offering payment terms to those customers, in which case it might be 30, 60, maybe even 90 days before that money will actually come into your business. And it's important that your cash flow starts to reflect those trends and how you have set your business up. And when we think about the assumptions for the money flowing out of the business, it's important that you get your head around the different types of expenditure that you will have. So you will have direct and indirect costs. Excuse me. So for example, stock and labour are the direct costs that you have to pay to produce your products or your services. And then you might have indirect costs such as marketing or travel. So these are costs that you will incur, but they're not directly attributed to you making your actual products. But actually, without spending on these headings, so without spending money on marketing or spending money on travel, you may not be able to deliver your product or service. And then you have your fixed and variable costs. So for example, rent and rates, insurance, debt repayments, they're fixed. We know what they're going to be for the duration of the next 12 months. We can easily put them into our cash flow. But we will also have variable costs. So our stock will vary. Our travel costs might vary. Our marketing costs will vary. And we need to be able to have some logic as to why they look different within our cash flow. And I'm always very suspicious when I see somebody's cash flow when some of the costs that I would expect to be variable are fixed. The same marketing cost month on month, or the same travel cost month on month, despite the fact that sales might be fluctuating. So think about the relationship that your costs have to your sales. And just like with sales, we have to think about the payment terms that you receive from your suppliers. Are you having to pay for stock in advance, for example, of producing and selling your product? That's probably going to be the case. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to buy in your stock and turn that around quickly enough in the space of a month. If you can, great, but you need to be able to explain that in your assumptions. So this is the logic that sits behind a cash flow forecast. And to bring this to life, I want to talk you through an example. Let me just pop back up on screen for a second. So I want to talk you through an example to show you, really focusing on the sales forecast, how this can help you start making proper, strategic, important decisions about your business. So the example I've got here is Sam Goldsmith. Sam is the founder of Nuts About Nuts, a new all-natural nut butter bar brand. And Sam, as a committed cyclist, wanted to create something that she could take easily with her on rides. They would pop into her cycling jersey. They'd be full of energy and nutrients, but they'd also be kind to the environment. So Sam embarked on small batch production from home. So she's got her food licenses in place, and she's been selling her bars at cycling events, focusing on reaching her primary target market of other amateur road cyclists. And she typically sells between 90 and 180 bars per event, and she sells them for £1.90. And typically she's attending 6 events per month across her region. So her sales from last year look like this. So she knows the number of events that she's attended. She's kept track of the number of units that she's sold at each event. She knows her selling price. So she's got a clear picture of what her sales were from her first few months of trading. But Sam now wants to think about the next year. What does year 2 for Nuts About Nuts look like? And she's got some decisions that she needs to make. So I'm going to take you through a couple of different scenarios. Just reminded, before I do that, let's just look at her revenue model. So for Sam, her revenue model is that she has one price of £1.90. She has one route to market, which are direct sales through the events that she attends. She has some one-off and some repeat purchases. So she's going to similar events where, you know, she's building up some loyalty and people are coming back and buying her products from her. There is seasonality, so she's definitely seeing peaks and troughs when there are more events than others. So she's seeing a peak in the summer and then the events trail off in the winter. And her payment terms, she's bringing cash in or card sales in immediately. So there are no credit terms. She's receiving the money instantly from her customers. So let's move on to a couple of scenarios for year 2. So scenario 1, Sam has calculated she's going to attend 13 events per month from February onwards. And she thinks that's a true reflection given the increase in her sales during the first year. And she's going to sell approximately 150 bars at each event. She thinks this is achievable for her to continue production from home. So what that looks like for her is this. There's no fluctuation now in seasonality. There's no fluctuation in terms of the number of units sold. And she hasn't changed her price. So she's continuing to sell her products at £1.90. So her route to market has stayed the same. The frequency has stayed the same. The seasonality has changed. Now I would be asking, why? Why do you think that next year, in terms of those seasonal peaks and troughs, is going to be any different from the previous year? And her cash payment terms have stayed the same. So she's now started taking card payments, or she intends to, but that still means that she's receiving the money pretty much immediately into her account. Now, in this scenario, if this was Sam forecasting for the year that we're currently in, she would find her business immediately in trouble. Those events that she attends have stopped completely. She has no way of driving those sales. Her reliance on one income stream is probably going to be potentially the end of her business because she no longer has that route to market. So if this had been Sam predicting last year into this year, actually things wouldn't be looking that great for her. But there's a second scenario that Sam could look at. And in this scenario, Sam really wants to diversify her revenue streams. The events have been useful, but she doesn't think that's a sustainable way of growing the business. She's had inquiries from both bricks and mortar and online retailers, and she's confident she'll see a growth in revenue through those routes to market. And she's also decided to tweak her retail price because she thinks her raw material costs are going to increase. So what Sam is doing now is revisiting her pricing strategy. She's increasing her pricing because of her predicted increase in cost of sales, but she also now has a B2B price. She has a retail wholesale price for her product. And she would expect her retailers to sell her products at the same price she does. So there will always be that comparison. Her route to market is starting to vary. So rather than just relying on events, she's now also looking at in-store and online retailers. So she's diversifying those revenue streams. The frequency will change. So she still has the one-off purchase at events, although she is building up some customer loyalty. But she will see repeat purchases coming online if she sets up her own e-commerce, and probably higher volumes being purchased. So people are more likely to buy multiples of her product than they might be if they bought from her at an event. And she's also going to see bulk orders coming through from her retailers. The seasonality, perhaps there's less seasonality because her online sales are actually able to reach a much wider audience. Her retailer sales are growing steadily, with specialist retailers reaching a year-round market. And while our events are seeing a peak across the summer, she's managing to flatten out those peaks and troughs through the diversification of her revenue. And her payment terms are changing, so she's still offering cash or card sales at time of purchase to her direct consumers, but she's decided she's going to offer 14-day credit terms to her new retailers. And that's, a sensible suggestion. She's not saying that she wants payment up front, but until she's built up a relationship with these stockists, she wants to be sure that she's going to get paid promptly for her products. And what this means for her sales forecast for next year is a much more complex, a much more in-depth, a much more detailed, a much more strategic view of what the year might look like. And if Sam had been facing the year that we've had in this scenario, then yes, her events may have decreased. And yes, maybe some of her bricks and mortar retailers would have taken a bit of a knock, but actually her online retailers would have been continuing to prosper. And if she'd been able to bring forward her own plans for e-commerce, so we can see here, she's predicted some e-commerce sales of her own, she could have brought that forward and started to see those sales starting faster. So what this does in this scenario is start to give Sam some options. It starts to give Sam an overview of how things might look differently. She could play around with the sales forecast now. She could think about what would happen if I gave my retailers 30 days credit or 45 days credit? What impact would that have on when the money is flowing into the business? What would happen if I pushed my e-commerce sales more by spending more money on my marketing? How would that increase my sales directly to consumer? What if I decided to do no events? Because actually in this year, that's probably the likely case. What impact would that have on the business? How could I replace those sales through different revenue streams? And it starts to paint a much clearer picture, both for Sam in terms of the decisions that she needs to make, but also for a funder who may be looking at supporting Sam's next stage of growth. This for me shows somebody who really understands their business and who can really use this as a tool to make some key decisions. Now, if we just recap briefly. So in terms of her pricing strategy, she's predicted changes in direct costs and she's taken that into consideration. She's diversified those routes to market. She's building loyalty, but also reaching new customers through her different routes to market. And the business is now less reliant on Sam making all of the sales. If she just does events, it's all down to Sam and perhaps a small team to help her. But now Sam can focus on the strategic growth and the operations of the business. So what this means in terms of, again, let me just shrink myself down a little bit. What this means in terms of the rest of the forecast is that we start to have a forecast where we can play around with some figures and we can see what this forecast is telling us in terms of what the future demands of the business are going to be. So first of all, in the bottom corner, we've got some money in the bank that Sam had from year one, and she's brought that forward because that's money that she wants to reinvest in the second year of her business. We can also see that Sam is thinking carefully about her stock. So the stock figures here, which suggest that she is buying in stock before she's making the sales. So the stock purchases in February are going to generate the sales that she makes in March, and so on. So the stock that she purchases in March will power the sales that she makes in February. So she's thinking logically in terms of when that money is flowing out and flowing back into the business. She can look at how much she wants to pay herself. So in this scenario, she's decided to pay herself £2,000 a month, but she could play around with that figure. This could help her decide from working on the business on a part-time basis. So maybe this has been a side hustle to start with. And this could help her decide when she can commit full-time to the business. So she can play around with these figures and look at different scenarios. She's included bank charges. So one of those variable costs, because she's taking card payments, she knows that she needs to pay a fee to the merchant services provider for taking those payments. But actually by being able to take card payments, she's probably going to encourage more people to buy from her. She's thought about her marketing, and again, this now reflects that marketing is a variable cost for the business. Although I would look at this and question whether enough is being spent on marketing to drive the level of sales that she's forecasting. But again, Sam could look at this, she could look at her marketing strategy, and she could start seeing where she could increase her marketing budget and the impact that would have on her cash flow. She considers that actually if she's going to start growing the business and she's going to start reaching out to retailers, she's probably going to have to move into premises. So again, she's going to set herself a budget from halfway through the year of spending £500 on premises. Now, obviously she'll need to do the research to see if that's achievable. But again, she can play around with that figure in this forecast, and she can start to get a sense of what's realistic for her to be able to afford in terms of that fixed overhead, but quite a substantial fixed overhead that she's not incurred previously. And the other critical thing that this is now telling us in this scenario is that if we look at the bottom of the screen here, there will come a point in the next 2 or 3 months where Sam is going to be spending more money than she has coming in. And this is one of the key things with the cash flow forecast, that if Sam is able to predict that actually, hold on a minute, I'm spending money and investing in stock and premises and myself, I'm now committing time to the business, but it's going to take a little while for the sales to pick up to start fully paying for those overheads, then actually I'm going to need a little bit of financial assistance. Now, the fact that she's able to predict this means that she can have a conversation with a funder. It could be her bank, it could be something like the Startup Loans Company, but she can have a sensible conversation which says, I've looked at my forecast, I think I'm going to need some working capital put into the business. What can you do to help me? And that's a much better situation to be in than to find herself in March or April of her second year of trading, suddenly running out of money. Because to then go to a bank and say, help, I've run out of cash, what can you do to help me? That's not such an easy conversation. It makes us nervous. It makes us nervous because Sam hasn't known, hasn't predicted that this situation was going to arise. So for Sam's benefit, it's much better to know in advance that this is something that she might need to discuss with her bank. So in that situation, she decides to look at a couple of options. So she looks at some debt finance. So Sam has made a forecast here that she's going to request a £1,500 overdraft initially, But while that comes through, she's going to apply for a larger loan. So she's going to take out some debt to put into her business. And that could be through the Startup Loans Company, it could be through her bank. And what that means is she's going to have loan capital and loan interest payments to make. So those become another fixed cost to the business. But importantly, it puts money in the bank and it takes her out of that red zone. It means that she's managing her cash flow better. She might be able to bring forward moving into premises. She might be able to increase her salary slightly to enable her to work full time in the business sooner. And she might be able to drive these sales faster than she's predicted. So by making this decision and by using this as a tool to forecast the financial needs of the business, Sam now has more choices she can make. And what she would probably do with her cash flow forecast is to look at different scenarios. So perhaps a scenario which feels comfortable, it shows steady growth. Perhaps a scenario whereby there's a dip in sales or her cost of stock increases more than she thought it would. And maybe a best case scenario when actually sales are potentially a bit higher than she would have predicted, but her costs maybe haven't changed. And she can play around with these different scenarios and basically model her finances for the next 12 months. And that's a really important place to get to. Let me just go back a second to that one. Because it's putting Sam in charge. It's enabling her to make decisions about her budgets, how much she wants to spend on marketing, whether or not she maybe wants to bring additional people. Can she employ people into the business? Can she afford to take on larger premises? Could she afford to outsource some of her production? Can she look at better packaging for her business? It helps her make decisions. And if she didn't have this financial forecast in her mind, how does she make those decisions? Are they based on gut instinct? Are they based purely on what's happened the year before? Sam really needs to think carefully about these decisions that she's making in her business. So I hope that gives you some kind of, I guess, confidence in how you would approach using your cash flow as a decision-making tool, not treating it as something that you do once and then you file away under that box is ticked. I've done what I've needed to do for a funder. I've done what I've needed to do for my business plan. I never need to look at this again. But actually that you start to get into the habit of having a living, breathing cash flow, that you're constantly reviewing your actual cash flow with what you forecast. And if your forecasts are out, that you're making the changes that your actual trading situation is telling you about. And that will enable you to get much more accurate, you'll get more confident about the forecasts that you're going to make for your business. Now the template that I've shown you here is a very, very straightforward one. I've used it in the past with businesses. And it means that you can create, if you're comfortable with Excel, you can create really sophisticated forecasting spreadsheets. If you're less comfortable, you can use something like the template that the Startup Loans Company provide, and I know that's the one that the University of Ulster will probably have shared with you. And it's great because it splits down your sales forecast, that will feed into your overall cash flow forecast, and it will challenge you about some of the assumptions that you're making. But there are many, many other cash flow forecast templates that you can use. Like I say, you can either download this one, you can find one online. Your bank may have one that they can provide for you, or you can create your own if you're feeling particularly confident. But the key thing is you take ownership of this. You don't ask someone else to complete it for you. You use it, you start to understand your figures, and it starts to power the decisions that you're making for your business. Thanks very much, and good luck.